October 10th, 1871. Philadelphia's mayoral race was being decided. It was the first major election since the 15th Amendment was ratified, giving Black Americans the right to vote. White Democrats were concerned because they knew recently enfranchised Black Philadelphians would vote for the Republican Party, the organization that liberated their brethren and gave them the right to vote. Democrats, who controlled South Philadelphia's Moyamensing district, were determined to stay in power and would stop at nothing to prevent African Americans from voting. 3 days before Election Day, Democratic operatives began attacking and intimidating Black Americans. At Union Hall, located at 7th and South, thugs stormed a campaign meeting of Black and white Republicans, throwing rocks and breaking up the gathering. This was just a warm-up to the merciless killings and violence that would occur on Election Day. On October 10th, Democratic leaders incited working-class Irish immigrants to unleash attacks. As the Democrats' political enforcers, Irish street gangs roamed the African-American community, randomly attacking African Americans with an assortment of dangerous weapons, rocks, and even guns. Much of the violence and killings was centered in the Accooe family's neighborhood. The family's local polling place at 6th and Lombard was a major epicenter of violence. The Democratic machine enlisted volunteer firefighting companies to act as organized political street gangs. One volunteer company, Moyamensing Fire Hose, known as the 27th, was particularly violent and murderous against Black Americans. This fire company was closely associated with the Moyamensing Killers street gang. An example of the butchery the 27th committed was the murder of a Black man named Isaac Chase, who met his doom when he was followed home by 2 members of the 27th. A man from the 27th ran up behind Mr. Chase and used an axe to viciously split open his head right near his doorsteps at 811 Emmeline Street. Mr. Chase's wife stood over her husband, crying while he lay bleeding and dying in the street. As the violence spread, Black Americans defended themselves, fighting back against these white gangs in pitched street battles, raging from block to block. Black men on rooftops hurled bricks at the 27th as they moved down the street. Pennsylvania Hospital filled up with the injured as African Americans clashed with whites in a full-blown riot. Hundreds of people were wounded or shot, and 4 African American men were murdered. That day, Black Philadelphians learned that freedom came with a price, and they would have to defend their rights with blood. Eldest son James Accooe would never forget this experience. The overwhelming influence of political power on the fate of his people was undeniable. To gain agency, not only for himself, but also his community, James decided to claw his way into politics. Using politics as a means to secure the future of his people would be morally challenging. As a rising local politician in Philadelphia's 8th Ward, James Accooe entered the seedy world of Philadelphia's Republican Party machine, where personal favors, payoffs, and backroom deals were standard fare. When James Accooe joined this competitive system, the Democrats had been defeated, and the city was now under the thumb of one political party, the Republican Party, and James positioned himself to reap the benefits. During the 1880s, the Republican Party's political machine in Philadelphia was fierce and crooked. Bolstered by an endemic and extensive patronage system, the Republican machine would dominate the city for 66 years. During the 19th century, Philadelphia's city council was divided into 2 legislative bodies, the Select Council and the Common Council. The Select Council exerted the most influence over patronage jobs, with the authority to approve appointments to city offices, including the chief officers and directors of city departments, and all subordinate officers and clerks. This meant that ward politicians like James wielded significant power because they determined who would be nominated and elected to the Select Council. Thus, these local leaders operated their own independent fiefdoms. James Accooe was known in local white circles as the Negro politician who owned the 8th Ward. After establishing his reputation, James strategically attached himself to prominent men with political potential, but who hadn't yet been elected to office, as these men would be indebted to James for his help in getting them elected. With this in mind, James cast his lot with 2 men. One was a rising young white lawyer fresh out of Harvard Law School named Boys Penrose, and the other, a powerful white businessman named Edwin H. Fitler. In 1884, Boys Penrose was elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. And then in 1886, he was elected to the Pennsylvania State Senate. Meanwhile, Edwin H. Fitler was elected mayor of Philadelphia that same year of 1886. Because of these victories, James Accooe had positioned himself to gain political favors. These men were a part of a strong political faction consisting of state Republican leaders and local Philadelphia businessmen. They conspired to eliminate the power of local bosses, district leaders, and ward politicians in a Machiavellian move to bring the local party under one centralized oligarchic rule. The ringleader of this faction, Matthew Key, was the state Republican top boss of Pennsylvania and mentor to State Senator Boys Penrose, who had been taken under Key's wing to be groomed as his successor. Since James Accooe had aligned himself with State Senator Penrose, James had secured his position with the most powerful political faction in Pennsylvania. In 1886, James Accooe's political mindedness paid off handsomely when he became the first African-American appointed to the position of deputy poll tax collector, thanks to the influence of his friend, State Senator Penrose. As financial compensation for his service, James was paid 10% of all tax gross receipt payments collected in the entire 8th Ward. James's patronage opportunities did not end there. Thanks to the Public Buildings Committee, James was also awarded a position as a police watchman. This agency oversaw the headquarters of city government and also U.S. government buildings like the Federal Mint and the Customs House. James's connections were not just beneficial to his career, but also benefited other family members. James's youngest brother, William Byrd, was given a job through the Gas Trust, a secret society which controlled the gas company that supplied gas for lighting the city of Philadelphia. Republicans often used the gas company to award perks for themselves and their interests. William Byrd was given this token for his family's service. James Accooe's son, Leon, would also benefit from the machine's political largesse, with an appointment as a special delivery messenger by the postmaster, serving as a special delivery carrier for several years. James Accooe was not alone in his political aspirations, but was a part of a thriving network of black Philadelphians entering the political arena. James occupied much of his time with his political cronies, as politics generated opportunities for him to experience a richer social life. James's personal political friends included Theophilus J. Minton, Frank J. R. Jones, and Stephen P. Gibson, key associates in James Accooe's black political clique. Notable among his friends, Theophilus J. Minton was a lawyer and heir to the Minton catering dynasty. Theophilus's family was prominent among the upper crust of the old black elite, and his father had owned a well-established restaurant at 4th and Chestnut that catered to a white clientele. Theophilus's teenage son Henry was attending Phillips Exeter Academy during this period, a prestigious white boarding school in New Hampshire, and would grow up to become Dr. Henry McKee Minton, a physician and pharmacist who is most known for co-founding Sigma Pi Phi, the oldest black American Greek letter organization. infamously known as the Boule. Another close associate of James Accooe was Frank J.R. Jones, a sportsman and a member of the Diligence Cricket Club, back when cricket was the favorite sport of black men in Philadelphia. He was also a member of the Pi Thean Baseball Club, the first black American baseball club in the nation, co-founded by slain civil rights martyr Octavius Catto. With ardent political aspirations, Frank J.R. Jones had sought nomination for city committeeman and as a candidate for police magistrate. Attempting to gain political positions alone was next to impossible for black men during the 1880s. So as an instrument to combine their talents and pool their clout into a united force to better exert their political muscle while helping each other rise politically, James Accooe and his black political friends, Theophilus J. Minton, Frank J.R. Jones, and several other black men came together to form the Edwin H. Fitler Republican Association in 1886, named after their mayoral patron. Political associations and clubs were important staples of the Republican machine during the late 19th century, and solidified alliances among political associates. From this organization, James Accooe and his allies strategized and plotted to gain political dominance for their mutual benefit, while raising the status of blacks in politics. Frank J.R. Jones was elected president of the Edwin H. Fitler Republican Association, and white city councilman Wenzel Hartman, who was closely associated with the black politicians of the 8th Ward, was appointed marshal. White politicians like Councilman Hartman and State Representative John M. Scott, being inducted as members of the club, helped give the Fitler Association broader appeal, creating a more effective interracial coalition that gave the group more muscle in promoting its interests. By 1888, the Edwin H. Fitler Republican Association had a reported 250 members. Its headquarters, located at 1218 Locust Street, was a testosterone-fueled gentleman's abode, filled with cigar smoke and alcohol, where members discussed the latest political news and debated the important issues of the day. According to contemporary reports, the clubhouse was a 3-story structure, thoroughly renovated and tastefully fitted throughout. The front parlor and rooms of the second floor were comfortably furnished. A key interior feature was a larger-than-life, 8-foot by 4.5-foot, portrait of President Ulysses Uru of Santo Domingo, which was given to the club as a gift by the United States Consul General to Santo Domingo, John S. Durham, an accomplished member of Philadelphia's old black elite, who was appointed ambassador to Santo Domingo by President Harrison. Consul General John S. Durham was a close friend to club members, especially Theophilus Minton, who would later write a biography of the Philadelphia-born diplomat. On October 24, 1888, the Edwin H. Fitler Association hosted a political rally in front of their headquarters on Locust Street. The club organized a street parade that drew a large crowd. Grand speeches were made by city councilmen, United States congressmen, and senators. 1888 was a year when Pennsylvania's Republican Party and its clubs demonstrated their power by organizing rallies and marches filled with pomp and circumstance. Its patriotic symbolism and elaborate pageantry seemed to invoke the Caesars of ancient Rome or the Ottoman sultans of Constantinople, flush with the cultish and gaudy display of political exhibitionism. In September of that year, a crowd of 25,000 people packed South Broad Street to witness a parade orchestrated by Pennsylvania's Republican Party in honor of Philadelphia Mayor Edwin H. Fitler and Pennsylvania Governor James Beaver. Along the 4.5-block parade route, Broad Street's elegant and luxurious hotels were decorated. The windows of the Hotel Lafayette and the Hotel Bellevue were all illuminated, with the front rooms filled with political dignitaries, congressmen, city councilmen, military, state, and city officials, and prominent businessmen. This event was reported as the largest political torchlight pageant ever seen in the city. Around 7:45 p.m., in a dramatically well-timed and orchestrated fashion, James Accooe and the Edwin H. Fitler Association made its grand entrance, marching up Broad Street to join the procession. Despite its social inclinations, the Edwin H. Fitler Club was not all fun and games. Its members used its infrastructure to attempt to gain real political power in state and local government. Black Americans' involvement in the formation of the Fitler Club was from its start aimed at creating a viable power base from where its black members could run for major political office. By 1890, members of the Fitler Club were pushing to get a black representative sent to the city's Common Council from within its own membership. Two members rose to the fray, lawyer Theophilus J. Minton and Frank J. R. Jones. On September 10, 1890, the Fitler Club decided that they would meet at a special caucus to debate and decide who would get the nod. Both Jones and Minton agreed to accept the decision of the caucus. Despite Theophilus J. Minton's colored aristocratic background, sophisticated and distinguished dress, and his light European-like features, which was a social advantage in black society at the time, Frank J. R. Jones was picked to represent African Americans in the coming election for Common Council. However, even with the full backing of the Fitler Association, Frank J. R. Jones did not win the city council seat. Members would not stop attempting to gain power that year. At the annual convention of the 1890 State Republican League, a routine nomination took a compelling turn when Stephen B. Gibson rose to speak. Philadelphia's only black councilman, Stephen B. Gibson, delivered a passionate speech addressing the great race problem within the Republican Party. After his heartfelt speech, in a show of joint racial uplift and cooperation, he championed Frank J. R. Jones as candidate for vice president of the State Republican League. Because of Gibson's riveting plea for racial equality, Frank J. R. Jones was elected second vice president. It would not be long, though, when the president of the State League stepped down, which elevated Frank J. R. Jones from second vice president to vice president. This did not sit well with members of the League, because they were very uncomfortable with a black American being so dangerously close to the presidency of their prominent organization. The Republican League proclaimed to be racially tolerant and supportive of African Americans politically, but members still could not stomach being led by a black American. This stir exposed a truth about the Republican machine. Black people were welcome as long as they continued to be subordinate to white leadership. In the end, Frank J. R. Jones would never be president of the League. The Fitler Association's profile was raised during the 1888 presidential Republican primary, when Mayor Edwin H. Fitler was endorsed as a candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. This was orchestrated by a political Svengali, Matthew Key. In the annals of American politics, few figures mastered the art of backroom deals and strategic cunning like Matthew Key, a man whose influence shaped one of the most controversial elections in U.S. history. It all began with a scheme. In the spring of 1888, Pennsylvania's Republican boss, Matthew Key, hatched a plan to secure the Republican presidential nomination for Ohio Senator John Sherman. He did this by orchestrating a daring ploy. He convinced Philadelphia Mayor Edwin H. Fitler to run as a decoy. Key promised Fitler prestige and honor, persuading him to lend his name as a candidate. The plan was simple. Fitler would hold Pennsylvania's delegate votes, only to transfer them to Sherman at the perfect moment. Initially, the strategy worked. Fitler and Sherman divided Pennsylvania's votes on the first ballot. But Key's careful planning wasn't enough. to counter a political storm brewing elsewhere. On the seventh ballot, Senator Benjamin Harrison dramatically surged ahead, claiming the nomination. Though Sherman's bid failed, Key wasn't done. Key turned his sights to the general election, now determined to secure the presidency for Benjamin Harrison. It was here that Key's true genius and his willingness to push ethical boundaries shone brightest. Key recognized New York as the pivotal battleground state. To outsmart the notorious Tammany Hall machine, infamous for ballot stuffing and election fraud, Key launched an audacious undercover operation in New York City. Under the guise of creating a city directory, Key's agents canvassed every block, documenting legitimate voters. The result was a weapon, a comprehensive voter roll that could expose any fraud attempts. As a final safeguard, Key arranged to have certified copies of all election returns delivered to him. If any election returns were altered by Tammany operatives, he'd know it. On Election Day, Key's tactics paid off. New York tipped the balance, delivering a narrow victory for Benjamin Harrison over incumbent Grover Cleveland, and Matthew Key was crowned Kingmaker. James Accooe's Republican machine faction, led by Key, influenced the most important political office in the land by electing the President of the United States. These victories were bittersweet for James Accooe. As the white men he supported gained prominent positions of power, black men like James Accooe struggled for tangible recognition. Even though James wielded political clout, black Americans were rarely elected to major office and were seldom chosen for significant political appointments. Involvement in the political system may have provided community prestige, but James would never rise above a limited position. Within the scheme of major politics, black American ward politicians like James were simply used as political pawns to shore up the black base. The imbalanced power dynamics within the Republican machine is illuminated by the enormous wealth divide between black and white politicians. The Accooes lived in a completely different socio-economic universe than their white political friends. The Accooes were of modest means, while men like Edwin H. Fitler and Boys Penrose were exceedingly rich. Mayor Fitler owned one of the largest cordage manufacturing businesses in America and was such a respected member of Philadelphia's business elite that the Philadelphia neighborhood of Fitler Square was named in his honor. Fitler's granddaughter, Margaretta Happy Fitler, later known as Happy Rockefeller, would become the wife of New York Governor and U.S. Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, heir to one of the most famous oil robber baron families in American history. Cut from a similar cloth, Senator Boys Penrose was a member of the fabulously wealthy Penrose family. His brothers Spencer and Richard Penrose were multimillionaires, as mining investors in gold, silver, and copper mines, and venture capitalists who owned a vast portfolio of companies. These politicians represented a lifestyle that the Accooes could never attain. The Accooes were financially limited to the same lower-tiered economic mediocrity that most middle-class blacks occupied. Jobs as porters, messengers, and bootblacks. As James entered his later years, his economic situation didn't increase. For a time, he was given an unglamorous patronage job at City Hall as a janitor. Boys Penrose became the most powerful politician in the state. And as a member of the U.S. Senate, Penrose would become a prominent member of the Senate Finance Committee. In the end, James did not fare as well, and his political power did not compare. At the time of James' death in 1916, he was still working as a messenger for the Republican machine. After decades serving a political faction that attained national prominence, James was left in the same position that many other black men who served white interest were relegated to. Despite being a member of one of the most powerful political factions in the nation, James's status would be overshadowed and made insignificant. And in the end, James and his black associates' contributions to political life would be lost to history.